Camp Aliceville, Alabama, December 1943. The dining hall fell silent as Major Klaus Richter lifted his fork, staring at the plate before him. 3 strips of bacon, 2 fried eggs with golden yolks, toast with real butter, hot coffee that actually smelled like coffee. Around him, 40 German officers sat frozen, their forks hovering in disbelief. "Is this some kind of test?" whispered Hauptmann Ernst Weber beside him. Klaus had commanded a panzer division in North Africa. He'd eaten field rations for 2 years, watched his men survive on black bread and thin soup. The last time he'd seen bacon was in a Berlin restaurant in 1940. Now, as a prisoner in the American South, he faced more food than he'd seen in months. "They're trying to break us," Ernst muttered. "Make us feel guilty. Make us talk." But Klaus wasn't thinking about interrogation techniques. He was thinking about his last letter from his wife, Margaret. "The children barely remember what meat tastes like. We stand in line for hours for half a loaf of bread." An American guard, barely 20 years old, walked past their table. "Something wrong with the food, sir?" Klaus looked up. The guard called him sir, a prisoner, an enemy officer. "No," Klaus said carefully, "it's very good." "My mom makes it better," the guard grinned, "but the cooks here try their best." After the guard left, Ernst leaned closer. "Don't eat it, Klaus. It's a trap. They'll say we enjoyed American hospitality while our families starve. They'll use it for propaganda." Klaus picked up his fork. The bacon was still warm, the fat glistening. "We're already propaganda," he said quietly, "the moment we surrendered. So you'll just accept this, enjoy this while—" "I'll survive this," Klaus cut him off. "That's what soldiers do." He took a bite. The salt and fat exploded in his mouth, and for a moment he forgot where he was. Then the guilt crashed over him like a wave. Margaret, the children, his men who didn't make it out of Africa. Ernst pushed his plate away. "I won't touch it, not while my family suffers." Other officers watched them, caught between hunger and loyalty. The American guards stood by the walls, relaxed, as if feeding enemy officers breakfast was the most natural thing in the world. Klaus set down his fork. The bacon was only half eaten, but his stomach churned. "You're right," he said. "This isn't just breakfast." "Then what is it?" Klaus looked around the dining hall, at the clean walls, the efficient kitchen, the casual abundance. Something was happening here, something beyond simple imprisonment. But what did the Americans really want? May see. The silence that followed breakfast was worse than the meal itself. Klaus stood by the window of Barracks 7, watching December rain turn the Alabama clay into red mud. Behind him, Ernst paced like a caged wolf. "They're testing our resolve," Ernst said for the 3rd time. "Tomorrow we refuse. All of us." "And starve?" Klaus didn't turn from the window. "That's what you want? I want to remember who we are. Before we discover what happened next, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. These stories connect people across the world, and we love to know where our dear viewers are." Now, back to Klaus's impossible choice. Klaus finally turned. Ernst's face was gaunt, his uniform, though clean, hung loose on his frame. They'd all lost weight in the transit camps before Aliceville. Now the Americans offered them back their strength, and Ernst wanted to refuse it on principle. "Who we are?" Klaus kept his voice level. "We're prisoners, Ernst. The war is over for us. The war is never over. Not until— Until what? Until we die of hunger to prove a point?" The door opened. Lieutenant Friedrich Steiner entered, younger than both of them, his face bright with confusion. "They're organizing a football match. Americans versus us. Tomorrow afternoon." Ernst stopped pacing. "Football? They say it's good for morale." Friedrich looked between them, sensing the tension. "The guards are excited. They want to see if we can play." Klaus felt something shift in his chest. Football, as if they were at a university, not a POW camp, as if war was just a temporary interruption of normal life. "This is insane," Ernst breathed. "They capture us, feed us like kings, and now they want to play games." Maybe that's exactly the point, Klaus said slowly. What point? Maybe they want us to forget we're supposed to be enemies. Friedrich sat down on his bunk, springs creaking. Is that so terrible? Forgetting for a while? Ernst's face darkened. Yes, because while we forget, our families suffer. While we play football, our country burns. Klaus moved away from the window. The rain continued its steady percussion on the roof. In North Africa, rain had been a blessing, a brief relief from the murderous heat. Here, it just made everything grey. I'm playing tomorrow, Friedrich announced. I was forward for München before the war. I want to remember what that felt like. Then you're a traitor, Ernst said flatly. I'm a survivor, Friedrich shot back. There's a difference. Klaus sat on his own bunk, feeling the weight of command he no longer held. In battle, decisions were clear. Advance or retreat, fight or surrender. But here in this strange prison where enemies offered bacon and football matches, nothing was clear anymore. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we'll see what game they're really playing. Ernst stared at him. You're going to play. I'm going to watch, Klaus replied. And I'm going to understand what the Americans want from us. Because it's not just our surrender they're after. Then what? Klaus met his friend's eyes. That's what frightens me. The football field was a patch of flattened grass behind the barracks, marked with white lime that bled into the damp ground. Klaus stood with arms crossed as prisoners gathered on one side, American guards on the other. The December sun broke through clouds, offering weak warmth. Captain James Morrison, the camp commander, walked to the center with a whistle and a leather ball. He was older than most guards, maybe 40, with crow's feet that suggested he smiled often. Gentlemen, Morrison called out in accented but clear German, today we remember that before we were soldiers, we were men who loved a good match. Ernst spat into the mud. Propaganda speech. But Klaus watched the American captain's face. Morrison wasn't performing for an audience. He believed what he was saying. Friedrich joined the German team along with a dozen others. They wore mixed uniforms, some Wehrmacht, some Luftwaffe, and moved onto the field with cautious excitement. The American team was mostly young guards, farm boys from Alabama and Tennessee, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never knowing real hunger. The whistle blew. For the first 10 minutes, both sides played carefully, testing boundaries. Then Friedrich intercepted a pass, danced around two defenders and scored. The German prisoners erupted in cheers. Even Ernst allowed himself a tight smile. Klaus felt something dangerous stir in his chest. Joy. The Americans scored next, their striker fast and aggressive. The game intensified. Prisoners shouted tactical advice. Guards whistled and clapped. The line between captor and captive blurred in the mud and sweat. This is wrong, Ernst said beside Klaus. Look at them, they're forgetting. Maybe that's mercy, Klaus replied. Mercy? Ernst turned on him. Klaus, this is manipulation. They give us bacon, play games with us, treat us like guests instead of prisoners. Why? So we'll betray our country? So we'll forget our duty? Klaus didn't answer. On the field, Friedrich collided with an American guard. Both went down. For a moment, tension rippled through the crowd. Then the guard laughed, offered his hand and pulled Friedrich up. They jogged back to positions together. That, Ernst hissed. That's what they want. Friendship with the enemy. It's obscene. Morrison walked over to them, his boots squelching in the mud. Major Richter, you don't play. I prefer to observe, Captain. Observation is useful, Morrison agreed in German. But participation teaches more. Teaches what? Morrison smiled. That enemies are made by politics. Men are made by their mothers, their hometowns, their first loves, their favorite songs. War makes us forget that. I prefer to remember. Ernst stepped forward. Is that what this camp is? A place to forget the war? No, Hauptmann. Morrison's smile faded. This is a place to remember you're human. There's a difference. He walked away, leaving the words hanging in the humid air. The match ended in a draw. Both teams shook hands, some laughing, others still cautious. Klaus watched Friedrich embrace an American guard who'd played opposite him, both breathless and grinning. That night, lying in his bunk, Klaus wrote a letter he knew would be censored before mailing. "Dearest Margaret, I am fed and safe. But I fear I'm losing something more important than the war. I am losing the ability to hate my enemy. Is that victory or defeat?" He never sent it. The interrogation room was smaller than Klaus expected. A wooden table, 3 chairs, walls painted institutional beige. Captain Morrison sat across from him, a thin folder open between them. "This isn't an interrogation," Morrison said in German. "Just a conversation." "Every conversation in a prison is an interrogation," Klaus replied. Morrison smiled. "Fair point. Coffee?" Before Klaus could answer, Morrison poured 2 cups from a thermos. Real coffee, the rich smell filling the small room. Another test, another gift. Klaus was beginning to understand the pattern. "Tell me about your family, Major." "That's not military information." "No," Morrison agreed. "It's human information. There's a difference." Klaus wrapped his hands around the warm cup but didn't drink. "Why do you care about my family?" "Because I have 3 daughters in Virginia who haven't seen me in 18 months. Because my wife writes letters about rationing and victory gardens and how our youngest lost her first tooth. Because war makes us forget that the man across from us also has daughters, also has a wife writing letters." "And if I tell you about my family?" Klaus asked. "What do you gain?" "I gain nothing," Morrison said. "But you might remember why surviving matters more than dying with principles." Klaus thought of Ernst's refusal to eat breakfast, his anger at the football match, his rigid loyalty to an ideology that felt increasingly distant. "Hauptmann Weber thinks you're trying to break us," Klaus said. "Break you?" Morrison leaned back. "Major, if we wanted to break you, we'd do what your side does to Russian prisoners, or what the Japanese do in the Pacific. This," he gestured around the room, "this is something different." "What is it?" "An experiment." Morrison pulled a photograph from the folder. "This is my daughter Sarah. She's 7. Last month she asked her mother why we're fighting people we've never met. My wife didn't have a good answer." Klaus stared at the photograph. A young girl with braids and missing front teeth, grinning at the camera. She could have been his own daughter, Elise. "You want me to feel sympathy," Klaus said, "to humanize you. I want you to remember you're human first, German second, soldier third. And if I refuse," Morrison closed the folder, "then you stay in this camp, well-fed and safe until the war ends. Nothing changes. But Major, I've read your file. You were a teacher before the war. Mathematics. Munich University. You didn't choose this path. It chose you." Klaus felt exposed. "You know nothing about my choices. I know you surrendered your entire company to save their lives. I know you countermanded orders to execute partisans in North Africa. I know you're not the enemy, Klaus. You're just a man caught in history's machinery." Hearing his first name from an enemy officer felt intimate and wrong. "What do you want from me?" Klaus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Morrison met his eyes. "I want you to go home after this war and teach mathematics again. I want you to remember that Americans gave you bacon and played football with you and treated you like a human being. And when your students ask about the war, I want you to tell them the truth." "What truth?" "That there are no enemies, only men who forgot they were men first." Klaus found Ernst in the barracks, writing a letter by the last light of evening. The other prisoners had gone to the recreation hall, another American innovation that made the camp feel less like a prison and more like a strange military academy. "They questioned you," Ernst said without looking up. "They talked to me," Klaus corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Ernst's pen scratched across paper. "What did they want?" Klaus sat on his bunk. The springs creaked, familiar now after 3 weeks at Aliceville. "They want us to forget we're enemies." "I knew it." Ernst's voice filled with bitter satisfaction. "And you? Did you forget?" "I'm trying to understand their strategy." Their strategy is corruption, Klaus. They feed us, entertain us, humanize themselves. Also will betray... Betray what? Klaus interrupted. Ernst, be specific. What exactly do they want us to betray? Ernst finally looked up, his face gaunt in the dim light. Our loyalty, our country, our country is losing the war, Klaus said quietly. You know it. I know it. Every man in this camp knows it. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. So that's it? Ernst's voice shook. We just accept defeat? Accept American kindness? Forget what they've done to our cities? What have the Americans done to our cities, Ernst? That's the British and their night bombing. The Americans... Klaus paused, choosing words carefully. The Americans gave me coffee today. They showed me photographs of their daughters. They asked about my family. Manipulation. Or mercy. Klaus leaned forward. What if Morrison is right? What if we're not enemies, just men forced into opposing uniforms? Ernst stood abruptly, his letter falling to the floor. That's exactly what they want you to believe. This is psychological warfare, Klaus. They're destroying your will to resist. Resist what? The war is over for us. The war is never over. Ernst's voice rose, drawing attention from prisoners passing outside. Not until we return home. Not until Germany prevails. Not until... Until what? Klaus stood now, facing his friend. Until we all die for a cause that's already lost? Ernst's hand moved to his collar, fingers touching the place where his iron cross once hung. I would rather die with honor than live with shame. And I would rather live to see my daughters grow up than die proving a point to no one. The words hung in the air between them. Outside, someone laughed, probably at a joke in the recreation hall. The sound felt obscene and wonderful at the same time. They've already gotten to you, Ernst said softly. You're already broken. No, Klaus replied. I'm already healing. And that terrifies you more than any interrogation. Ernst picked up his letter, folded it carefully, and walked to the door. He paused, silhouetted against the corridor light. When they ask you to denounce Germany, to speak against the Führer, to cooperate with their propaganda, and they will ask, Klaus, I wonder if you'll remember this conversation. I wonder if American bacon is worth your soul. He left before Klaus could respond. Klaus sat alone in the darkening barracks, Ernst's question echoing in his mind. Was he being manipulated? Was Morrison's kindness just a sophisticated form of torture? Or was the real torture refusing to accept mercy when it was genuinely offered? Outside, the dinner bell rang. Tonight's menu would include meat, vegetables, bread and dessert. Somewhere in Germany, his family stood in ration lines, hungry and cold. Here, his enemy offered him more food than he could eat. Klaus closed his eyes and tried to remember what honor meant, but all he could picture was Morrison's daughter, grinning with missing teeth, asking her mother why they fought people they'd never met. He still didn't have a good answer. January 1944 arrived with unexpected warmth. Klaus stood in the camp library, another American edition that felt surreal, holding a German newspaper. Not a propaganda sheet, but Die Welt, printed by prisoners in other camps, filled with honest accounts of the war's progression. They let us read the truth, Friedrich said beside him, scanning headlines. Why would they do that? Klaus studied a map showing Allied advances, Sicily fallen, Italy surrendering, the Eastern Front collapsing. Every week brought new evidence of Germany's inevitable defeat, printed clearly for all prisoners to see. Morrison entered the library, carrying a stack of books. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I brought some new mathematics texts, Major Richter. Thought you might enjoy them. Klaus accepted the books cautiously. Advanced calculus, theoretical mathematics, subjects he'd taught at university. You're very thorough, Captain. I believe in knowing my prisoners. Morrison smiled. Or should I say, knowing the men temporarily in my care? After Morrison left, Friedrich whispered, He's recruiting you. For what? I don't know yet, but this isn't normal prisoner treatment. They're preparing us for something. That night, Klaus was called to Morrison's office, not the interrogation room, but an actual office with a desk, filing cabinets, and a photograph of Morrison's family on the wall. "Sit, please." Morrison gestured to a comfortable chair. "I have a proposal." Klaus remained standing. "I won't provide military intelligence." "I don't want intelligence, I want teachers." Morrison opened a folder. "We're starting education programs, teaching English to prisoners who want to learn, teaching American civics, democracy, history, and I want German officers to help. You want us to indoctrinate our own men." "I want you to prepare them for the world after the war," Morrison corrected. "Klaus, Germany will lose. You know it, I know it. When that happens, your country will need men who understand democracy, who can rebuild without repeating the mistakes that led to this war." Klaus felt his heart race. This was it, the real purpose behind the bacon, the football, the kindness. "You want collaborators. I want survivors who can become leaders." Morrison leaned forward. "The Nazi regime will fall. What comes next depends on men like you, educated, thoughtful, willing to see beyond propaganda. And if I refuse, you continue enjoying our hospitality until the war ends." "But Klaus, think about your daughters. What Germany will you return to? What future will they have if men like you refuse to help shape it?" Klaus gripped the back of the chair. "This is what Ernst warned me about. Betrayal disguised as pragmatism. This is survival disguised as betrayal." Morrison replied, "There's a difference, and you're smart enough to know it. How many others have you approached?" 15 officers so far. 8 agreed, 5 are still considering. 2 refused outright, including your friend Hauptmann Weber. Klaus looked at Morrison's family photograph. 3 daughters, all smiling. Safe in Virginia while the world burned. "I need time," Klaus said. "Take all the time you need." Morrison stood, extending his hand. "But Major, time is the one thing Germany doesn't have anymore." Klaus didn't shake his hand. He walked out into the January warmth, feeling the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on him like gravity itself. Ernst found him at dawn, sitting on the barrack steps, watching the sky lighten over Alabama clay. "They asked you," Ernst said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes. And?" Klaus didn't answer immediately. Around them the camp began its morning routine. Prisoners heading to breakfast, guards changing shifts, the mundane machinery of imprisonment grinding forward. "Morrison wants me to teach," Klaus finally said. "English, American civics, democracy." Ernst sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "And you're considering it?" "I'm considering my daughter's future. By betraying your country?" Klaus turned to face his friend. "Ernst, what country? The Germany we knew is gone. The Third Reich is dying. When we return home, if we return, what will be left?" "Our honor," Ernst said firmly, "our integrity, the knowledge that we didn't collaborate with the enemy, even when they offered us comfort and safety." And our families?" Klaus's voice broke slightly. "What will they eat, Ernst? How will they survive in the ruins of a defeated nation? With our honor?" Ernst stood abruptly. "So you'll do it. You'll teach German prisoners to love American democracy, to forget their homeland, to become, what? Americans in German uniforms. I'll teach them to survive what's coming. By destroying who they are. By helping them remember who they were before the war." Klaus stood now, his voice rising. "Teachers, farmers, engineers, fathers. Not soldiers, not Nazis, just men." Several prisoners had stopped to watch them, drawn by the raised voices. Klaus saw Friedrich among them, his young face troubled, Ernst's hands clenched into fists. "If you do this, Klaus, we're finished. You won't just betray Germany. You'll betray every man in this camp who still believes in something beyond American bacon and football matches." "I'm trying to save them." "You're trying to save yourself from guilt." Ernst's voice cracked. "You want to believe the Americans are right, that we were wrong all along, that collaboration is actually mercy. Because if that's true, you can go home without shame." The words hit Klaus like physical blows. Was Ernst right? Was his pragmatism just cowardice wearing a philosophical mask? I have to make a choice, Klaus said quietly. We all do. Then make it. Ernst stepped back. Teach for the Americans. Help them remake Germany in their image. But don't pretend it's anything noble. Don't pretend it's for your daughters. It's for you, Klaus. It's so you can look in the mirror without seeing a defeated man. Ernst walked away, leaving Klaus standing alone while the camp watched. Friedrich approached carefully. Major, what will you do? Klaus looked at the young lieutenant, barely 25, his whole life ahead of him, waiting for someone to tell him the right path. I don't know, Klaus admitted. But Friedrich, let me ask you, when you go home after this war, do you want to understand why we lost? Or do you want to repeat the same mistakes? Friedrich's eyes widened. You're going to do it. You're going to teach for them. I'm going to learn, Klaus corrected. And maybe in learning, I'll find a way to help Germany rise from the ashes without burning the world again. But even as he said it, he wondered if Ernst was right. Was this wisdom or rationalization? Survival or surrender? The breakfast bell rang. Klaus didn't move. He'd lost his appetite for American bacon. Today, the classroom was a converted storage room. 20 chairs arranged in rows, a blackboard mounted on the wall. Klaus stood at the front, chalk in hand, 15 German prisoners watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Morrison sat in the back, observing but not interfering. Gentlemen, Klaus began in German, then switched to English. Gentlemen, today we begin learning the language of our captors, not to betray our country, but to understand the world we'll return to. A veteran Luftwaffe pilot raised his hand. Major Richter, why should we learn the enemy's language, so we can beg for mercy better? Scattered laughter rippled through the room. Klaus saw Ernst standing in the doorway, watching with cold judgment. We learn, Klaus continued, because knowledge is power. Because understanding your opponent is not weakness, it's strategy. Sun Tzu taught that. Sun Tzu also taught about honor in warfare. Another prisoner called out. What honor is there in this collaboration? Klaus set down the chalk. This was the moment. Either he convinced them, or he lost them entirely. Let me tell you a story, he said quietly. In North Africa, my company captured a British medical unit. We could have executed them as spies. They wore no Red Cross markings. Instead, I let them treat our wounded alongside their own. My commanding officer called it collaboration. I called it humanity. The room fell silent. That British doctor, Klaus continued, later saved my life when I was wounded. He didn't have to. I was the enemy. But he remembered I'd shown mercy, so he returned it. That's not collaboration. That's surviving with your soul intact. Ernst moved into the room, his voice cutting through the tension. Beautiful story, Klaus. Did you tell them the part where that British unit was later bombed by the Luftwaffe, where everyone died because you didn't follow orders? Klaus felt the blood drain from his face. He'd buried that memory, tried to forget the twisted metal and the screams. You made a choice based on sentiment, Ernst pressed on, addressing the class now. And good men died because of it. That's what collaboration costs. That's what mercy costs. Is that the lesson you want to teach? Morrison stood from the back. Hauptmann Weber, this is a classroom, not a debate forum. Then let's debate. Ernst turned to him. Captain Morrison, you want these men to learn democracy? Then let them hear both sides. Let them decide if betraying their country is really the path to redemption. Morrison considered for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. You have the floor, Hauptmann. Ernst moved to the front, standing beside Klaus. These Americans feed you, entertain you, educate you. Why? Out of kindness? No, out of strategy. They want you to return home as American sympathizers, spreading their ideology, undermining whatever government emerges from the ruins. Or, Klaus interjected, they want us to return home as men who remember that enemies can show mercy. That war doesn't erase our humanity. Your humanity? Ernst's laugh was bitter. You talk about humanity while learning the language of the people bombing our cities? While our families starve, you sit in comfortable classrooms debating philosophy? Friedrich stood from his seat. Hauptmann, with respect, we're already captured. The war is over for us. Refusing to learn doesn't help our families. It just leaves us unprepared for whatever comes next. Unprepared, Ernst's voice rose, or untainted. There's honor in resistance, even quiet resistance. If we all collaborate, who will remember what we fought for? We fought for a lie! Klaus's words exploded into the room. Ernst, for God's sake, look at the newspapers. Look at what's happening. The Reich is crumbling. Everything we were told, everything we believed, it's collapsing into dust and blood. The prisoners shifted uncomfortably. This was dangerous territory, questioning the cause itself. Ernst's face went pale. Careful, Klaus. No. Klaus picked up a newspaper from his desk. Italy surrendered. The Eastern Front is retreating. Our cities are burning. At what point do we admit we're not the heroes of this story? Morrison stepped forward. Gentlemen, this discussion has gotten heated. Let's take a break. No, Ernst interrupted. Let Major Richter finish. Let him tell us all how collaboration is actually patriotism, how betrayal is actually wisdom. Let him convince us that everything we believed in was a lie, so we can all sleep better in our comfortable American beds. Klaus met his friend's eyes across the room. Years of friendship, battles fought together, now reduced to this moment of absolute division. I can't convince you of anything, Ernst, Klaus said softly. I can only tell you what I believe. That surviving this war with our humanity intact is more important than dying with our principles. That our families need us alive and clear-headed, not dead and glorious. That maybe, just maybe, the Americans are offering us a gift, not setting a trap. And if you're wrong, Ernst asked, if this is all manipulation, then I'll have learned English and mathematics and gone home to my daughters, Klaus replied, and you'll have starved yourself on principle and gone home bitter and broken. Which of us serves Germany better? The silence that followed was absolute. Every prisoner in that room understood they were witnessing more than an argument. They were watching the future divide itself into two paths. Ernst picked up his cap from the desk. Choose your path, gentlemen, but remember, collaboration with the enemy, no matter how well-intentioned, is still betrayal. He walked out, his boots echoing down the corridor. Klaus turned back to the blackboard, his hand shaking as he picked up the chalk. Today's lesson, he said quietly, is about the English word for survival. March 1944. Klaus sat in Morrison's office. Reports spread across the desk. Evaluations of prisoners in the education program, letters from their families, psychological assessments. Hauptmann Weber has been organizing resistance, Morrison said without preamble. Nothing violent, but he's convincing prisoners to boycott classes, refuse participation in recreational activities. He's becoming a problem. Klaus felt his stomach tighten. You're asking me to inform on him. I'm asking you to mediate. You're the only one he might still listen to. He thinks I'm a traitor, but he respects you. Morrison pushed a letter across the desk. This arrived yesterday. It's from his wife. Klaus picked it up, reading the cramped German handwriting. Frau Weber described standing in ration lines for hours, her children sick from malnutrition, their apartment building damaged in a bombing raid. She ended with a desperate plea. Please survive this war, Ernst. Nothing else matters. Just survive. He hasn't read this yet? Klaus asked. I wanted you to see it first. Morrison leaned back in his chair. Klaus, I'm not asking you to betray your friend. I'm asking you to save him from himself. He's organizing hunger strikes, urging prisoners to refuse medical treatment. If this continues, he'll destroy himself to prove a point. Klaus set down the letter. What do you want me to do? Talk to him. Show him his wife's letter. Help him understand that loyalty to Germany doesn't require self-destruction. And if he refuses, Morrison's face hardened, then I'll have to isolate him, transfer him to a facility where his influence can't spread. Klaus, I don't want to do that. He's a good man caught in bad ideology, but I can't let him derail the progress we're making." Klaus understood the unspoken threat. "Help us, or lose your friend entirely." That evening, Klaus found Ernst in the chapel, another American edition, non-denominational, open to all prisoners. Ernst sat alone in the back pew, head bowed. "I'm not here to pray," Ernst said without turning, "just to remember who I was." Klaus sat beside him. "I have something for you." He handed over the letter. Ernst stared at it, recognizing his wife's handwriting. His hands trembled as he opened it. Klaus watched his friend read, saw the color drain from his face, saw the moment the words hit home. When Ernst finished, tears tracked down his cheeks. "She wants me to survive," Ernst whispered. "Just survive. Nothing about honor or duty or country. Just survive." "Sometimes that's enough," Klaus said gently. "Is it?" Ernst looked at him, his eyes red. "Klaus, if I stop resisting, if I accept what you've accepted, will I even recognize myself when I go home? Will my children know their father, or will they meet a stranger who traded his principles for American bacon? They'll meet a man who chose them over ideology," Klaus replied. "A father who decided living for his family mattered more than dying for a cause." Ernst folded the letter carefully, precisely, as if it were the most important document in the world. "You make it sound so noble, but it feels like defeat. Maybe defeat is just another word for wisdom, or cowardice." "Ernst," Klaus paused, choosing words carefully. "Morrison is going to transfer you if you continue the hunger strike. He'll isolate you, remove you from the other prisoners. Is that what you want? To spend the rest of the war alone in a cell, proving a point no one will remember?" Ernst's jaw clenched. "So you're here as his messenger, his collaborator. I'm here as your friend. Friends don't ask friends to betray themselves." Klaus felt anger flare. "And friends don't watch friends starve themselves to death. For God's sake, Ernst, look at your wife's letter. She's not asking you to resist. She's not asking you to maintain honor. She's begging you to live. Because she doesn't understand. She understands perfectly." Klaus stood, his voice echoing in the empty chapel. "She understands that ideology is cold comfort when your husband is dead, that principles don't feed your children or keep them warm at night, that sometimes surviving is the bravest thing you can do." Ernst stood too, facing him. "When did you become such a coward, Klaus?" The word hung between them like poison. "When I became a father," Klaus replied quietly. "When I realized my daughters needed me alive more than Germany needed me dead." Ernst looked at the letter again, at his wife's desperate handwriting, at the plea that pierced through all his carefully constructed defenses. "If I stop the hunger strike," he said slowly, "if I stop organizing resistance, will you promise me something?" "What?" "Promise me you'll remember. When this is over, when we go home to whatever's left of Germany, promise me you'll remember we were soldiers once, that we believed in something, even if it was wrong, that we had honor, even if it was misplaced." Klaus felt tears sting his own eyes. "I promise." Ernst sat down heavily, the letter still in his hands. "Then tell Morrison I'll eat breakfast tomorrow. Tell him I'll stop the resistance. Tell him," his voice broke, "tell him he won. This isn't about winning, Ernst." "Isn't it?" Ernst looked up at him. "Then what is it about?" Klaus sat beside his friend, putting a hand on his shoulder. "It's about going home. That's all. Just going home." They sat together in the chapel while evening fell, two defeated men trying to convince themselves that surrender was actually victory, that collaboration was actually survival, that choosing life over death was actually brave. Outside, the dinner bell rang. Ernst stood straightening his uniform. "Shall we?" he asked, gesturing toward the door. Klaus nodded. They walked together to the mess hall, where bacon and eggs waited like a daily reminder that the world was more complicated than their training had prepared them for. Behind them, Ernst's wife's letter lay forgotten on the pew, a testament to the simple truth that love outlasts ideology, that family trumps country, that sometimes the hardest battle is admitting the war is already lost. D. May 1945. Klaus stood in Morrison's office with 15 other prisoners, listening to the radio broadcast. President Truman's voice crackled through the speaker, formal and clear. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The Third Reich had fallen. The war in Europe was over. Friedrich wept openly. Ernst stood rigid, his face a mask. Klaus felt nothing, just a hollow space where certainty used to live. "Gentlemen," Morrison turned off the radio, "you'll be going home soon. The repatriation process will take months, but it's beginning. And I want you to understand what you'll find there." He pulled down a map of Europe, marked with occupation zones: American, British, French, Soviet. Germany divided into pieces, carved up by the victors. "Your country no longer exists as you knew it," Morrison continued. "The government has collapsed. Cities are destroyed. Millions are displaced. What you return to will be chaos." "Because you destroyed it," Ernst said flatly. "Because war destroyed it," Morrison corrected. "All of us, together. But now comes the harder part. Rebuilding." Klaus studied the map. His hometown of Munich sat in the American zone. His family, if they still lived, would be under American occupation. The thought felt surreal. "The men who participated in our education programs," Morrison said, looking directly at Klaus, "will have advantages. You speak English. You understand democratic principles. You can help bridge the gap between occupiers and occupied. Collaborators get special treatment," Ernst muttered. "How convenient." Morrison didn't rise to the bait. "Hauptmann Weber, you can return home bitter and resistant, or you can return home prepared. The choice has always been yours." Over the following weeks, the camp transformed. Prisoners prepared for repatriation, learning what documents they'd need, where to report, how to navigate the occupied zones. The Americans organized job training, teaching skills that would be valuable in reconstruction: engineering, medicine, education. Klaus volunteered for everything, not out of idealism anymore, but out of desperate pragmatism. He needed every advantage when returning to a country he no longer recognized. One evening, he found Ernst packing his few belongings: letters from home, a photograph of his family, the Iron Cross he'd kept hidden despite regulations. "They're sending me home next week," Ernst said. "First transport to Munich." Klaus felt his heart skip. "That's where Margaret is." "You could find her. Tell her I'm coming." Ernst looked at him for a long moment. "Would she even recognize the man you've become?" "Would your wife recognize you?" Klaus shot back. "Ernst, we've both changed. The question is whether we've changed into men who can help rebuild, or men who'll just wallow in what was lost." Ernst placed the Iron Cross in his pocket. "I'll find your wife. I'll tell her you're alive. But Klaus, when you come home, don't expect gratitude. Don't expect people to appreciate your American education and your democratic principles. They'll see you as what you are, a collaborator who learned the conqueror's language while they suffered. Then they'll see wrong. Will they?" Ernst picked up his bag. "Or will they see clearly for the first time?" Nay, he left without saying goodbye. Klaus stood alone in the barracks, wondering if his friend was right. Had these months at Aliceville prepared him for the future, or just estranged him from his own people? Morrison found him an hour later, standing by the window, watching the Alabama sunset. "Your transport leaves in 3 weeks, Morrison said. "I wanted to thank you, Klaus, for your help with the education program, for mediating with Weber, for choosing a difficult path." "Did I choose it?" Klaus asked. "Or did you manipulate me into it?" Morrison smiled sadly. "Does it matter? You're going home alive, educated and prepared. That's more than most prisoners of war can say. And you? What did you gain from all this?" "Dillen, the hope," Morrison said quietly, "that when your daughters ask about the war, you'll tell them Americans weren't monsters, that you'll teach your students that democracy isn't the enemy, that maybe, just maybe, the next generation won't repeat our mistakes." Klaus turned to face him. "You really believe that? That bacon and football and education programs can prevent another war?" I believe that understanding prevents war. Ignorance and hatred cause it. Morrison extended his hand. Safe travels, Major Richter. May you find your family whole and your country ready for men like you. This time, Klaus shook his hand. 3 weeks later, Klaus Richter boarded a transport ship bound for Germany, carrying a certificate in English teaching, a letter of recommendation from Morrison, and the profound uncertainty of a man returning to a homeland that no longer existed. As the ship pulled away from the American shore, Klaus stood on deck, watching Camp Aliceville disappear into the distance. Behind him lay 2 years of unexpected mercy, uncomfortable learning, and the slow dismantling of everything he'd believed about enemies and allies. Ahead lay Germany, defeated, divided, destroyed. And somewhere in the ruins, his family waited, not knowing if he'd return as the man they remembered, or as someone irrevocably changed by American bacon, democratic principles, and the painful realization that honor was more complicated than he'd ever imagined. The Atlantic stretched before him, cold and grey, a physical barrier between who he'd been and who he'd become. Klaus Richter touched the iron cross hidden in his own pocket. He'd kept it too, despite everything, and wondered if a man could be both patriot and collaborator, both loyal and pragmatic, both German and something new. He didn't have an answer, but for the first time since his capture, he believed that maybe not having all the answers was itself a kind of wisdom. Behind him, America faded into memory. Ahead, Germany waited in ruins, and Klaus Richter sailed toward home, carrying the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the enemy feeds you, teaches you, and sends you home with hope. And that makes them harder to hate than any ideology ever prepared you for.